In the city of London, a serial killer unleashes terror upon its inhabitants, while John Luther, a once-disgraced detective, finds himself confined behind prison bars. Plagued by the haunting memory of his inability to capture the cyber psychopath who now taunts him, Luther resolves to escape his imprisonment, driven by an unwavering determination to complete the unfinished task using any means available to him. Hello, and welcome to I Am Movies. The movie begins when Callum Aldrich, a cleaner, receives a phone call from an unknown person. The person blackmails Callum, asking him to come to a particular location. The person has this secret picture of Callum. He threatens to leak it to his family and friends. Despite his reluctance, Callum complies and arrives at the designated place, only to find an accident has occurred there. Callum is scared, so he calls the police to report the situation. However, the supposedly dead man suddenly gets up and kidnaps Callum, rendering him unconscious with a taser gun. DCI John Luther is assigned to the case and discovers the body of Sirius Jones, who went missing 7 years ago. Luther realizes that Callum's presence at the scene was not a coincidence, and someone intentionally wanted to kidnap him. He promises Callum's mother, Corinne, that he will find her son.
I promise. I'll bring your boy home.
Meanwhile, David Robey, a wealthy trader and serial killer, observes Luther's involvement and begins to dig up information about Luther's past illegal acts as a police officer. Robey coerces another police officer, and as a result, Luther is fired, prosecuted, and imprisoned. While in prison, Luther is targeted by fellow inmates who harbor resentment towards him since he was once a police officer. Luther is also assaulted during a bath. 1 year later, Corinne receives a call from someone claiming to be Callum. She is given a location to meet him, but upon arrival, she discovers a room filled with dead bodies, one of which is Callum's. Robey has orchestrated this trap and coerces other victims' parents to the location. A fire breaks out, but Corinne manages to survive and sees a masked man watching her while the building burns. Later, DCI Odette Rain takes over the case. She realizes that 8 victims officially reported as missing are connected to the killings. Rain suspects that the killer knew the house would be vacant, and the crimes date back as far as 11 years. She believes the killer meticulously planned and executed these murders, leaving behind a significant amount of data to analyze. Rain challenges her team to find a point of commonality among the victims to identify the killer. In prison, Luther receives a letter with the number 65.8 written on it, which he discovers is a radio frequency. It contains a recording of Robey murdering Callum and blaming Luther for the deaths.
You know, I had him. Yeah, I had him tucked away.
Meanwhile, Corinne visits Luther in prison and expresses her disappointment that he hasn't found her son's killer. Unknowing her, Robey, her son's killer, had brought her to the prison and intended to manipulate her for his purposes. Luther contacts Rain, offering his assistance in the case. However, she refuses, considering it her investigation. Rain instructs her subordinate, DS Archie Woodward, to confiscate Luther's phone. However, Luther manages to make a call to his former associate, McCabe, asking for help to break out of prison. But before they can finalize the plan, officers seize Luther's phone. Later, Luther then arranges with the prison guards to orchestrate his transfer to another facility that night. The plan involves having the prisoners attack Luther, forcing the system to relocate him. However, Luther is warned that if things go wrong, he could be killed by the prisoners. Despite the risks, Luther is prepared for any outcome. That night, a prisoner attempts suicide, but is saved by the guards. However, he knocks them unconscious and runs away with the key. The guards are also part of the plan. The prisoner opens all the cells, and there is chaos. Many of the prisoners try to kill Luther by setting fire to his cell, but he fights back to save himself. Considering Luther's life in danger, the guards decide to transfer him, but on the way, the car stops and McCabe rescues Luther. Robey visits his wife Georgette in the hospital. He mocks her deformed body and makes her watch a sad video. Meanwhile, McCabe gifts Luther an old car to begin his hunt for Robey. Rain receives the news of Luther's escape, so she brings in retired DSU Martin Schenk as a consultant to find Luther. Schenk finds from Luther's belongings where he might be, so he tells Rain that the killer got to him using an FM broadcast, 65.8 FM. He asks her to trace the frequency to the source, and she'll find Luther. However, Luther reaches the broadcasting location and meets Derek. After some intimidation, Derek tells Luther that he was blackmailed by a man who has a recording of some of his videos.
Catfisher had it all on film, all the things I did.
He said the transmitter arrived by courier, and that he was told to leave it running for 24 hours and then discard it. Derek says Robey always contacts him via text message and never uses the same phone for more than a day. The police also arrive, but Leather escapes. At Robey's stronghold, some hackers stalk people from all over the world. They monitor their phones, cameras, tablets, and home cameras, every device. After discovering their secrets, they blackmail them to do what they wish. In this way, Robey enjoys killing these people, just like he blackmailed Callum at the beginning. Later, Leather gets Robey's location at Piccadilly Circus from Martin. Meanwhile, 3 of Robey's victims, a lady and 2 men, are standing on the roof of the building with cameras around their necks, about to jump. Leather calls from Derek's phone, which Robey receives. Rain deploys armed police officers to arrest Leather and Robey. Leather confronts Robey there, but he quickly grabs a teenager and puts a knife to his neck, taking him hostage. At this point, 2 of the victims jump down from the building, crashing into cars and causing a commotion. Robey tells Leather that this is just the beginning. The police arrive, and the 3rd victim finally jumps, causing more chaos. Robey takes this as an opportunity to escape through the subway, and Leather chases after him. Robey escapes into London's underground tunnel after fighting Luther and murdering an armed policeman. Robey calls Rain's subordinate, DSR Archie Woodward, who happens to be one of his victims, and asks why he didn't inform him that Leather was out of prison. Robey calls one of his partners, Kachimov, and asks if he has prepared the place and the last batch of captives. Kachimov has kidnapped some teenagers. Robey tells him to bring them to his secret mansion. Later, Martin calls Leather to see if he is all right. While they are talking, asks to speak with Rain and tells her that we all have something that we don't want anyone else to know about, something we're ashamed of. It could be something sexual, financial, or even criminal.
Could be financial, could be criminal.
The problem is, these days people live their secret lives out on the internet, so he thinks the killer is probably lurking and fishing for secrets. The killer blackmails them to make them come to him. Leather believes that the fear of shame, being called out, and being caught is far more powerful than the fear of death. During this conversation, Leather's location is traced, and a team is sent to arrest him. Later, Rain calls her daughter, Enya, and tells her that she might not be able to drive her to school tomorrow, so she can take a cab. Later, Enya feels the presence of someone in her house, and Robey kidnaps her. Leather meets Corinne and tells her that he has seen the killer. He thinks the killer knew something dark that he was using to blackmail Callum. Leather believes she knows the killer.
I think you know this man.
And asks her if someone new has come into her life since she lost Callum. It could be anyone she possibly met at the support group. She tells him that she met a man named Tommy at the support group. Tommy lost his wife in a terrible circumstance, and he also took her to prison the day she went to see Leather. She says Tommy has been in the house, picked up Callum's pictures, and commiserated with them. Leather now puts all suspicion on Tommy. At the station, Martin points out that at least 5 families have been befriended by a man in his 40s. The names differ, but the general description is approximately the same. However, each of these men claims to have had a wife who burned to death in a house fire in Eccleston Square.
Burned to death in a house fire in Eccleston Square.
While checking the details, Robey's information comes to light. Then Robey calls Rain and tells her that Enya is with him. Robey tells her that if she wants her daughter alive, Leather will have to be killed. Rain calls Leather to tell him that he is right about the killer. The killer has worked his way into their lives, befriending them. She calls him to meet her. When Leather and Rain meet, she reveals that Robey has kidnapped her daughter, and she wants him to come with her so she can get Enya released. Leather tries to convince her that both of them can work together on this case, and no one will know about it. She reluctantly agrees to work with him. Then they both visit Robey's ex-wife, Georgette. Rain tells her that Robey has kidnapped her daughter.
Georgette, he's got my daughter.
Georgette tells them that Robey owns a mansion in rural Norway. Leather calls Martin and asks for one last favor. To get Enya back, they leave for Norway. Robey calls Archie and asks about Rain. Archie tells him that he has set up an alert on her passport and that she is on her way to Norway. Archie is blackmailed by Robey into killing Georgette, but he is intercepted by Martin, who was sent by Leather to protect her. Leather knew that Robey could kill his wife because she had revealed the secret location. That's why he had already sent Martin to protect her. At this point, Archie commits suicide by injecting himself with poison. Leather and Rain travel through the snow to Robey's mansion in rural Norway. Leather notices several bodies floating underneath the ice. When they get inside the mansion, they hear Enya crying, and they see many hanging dummies. There is also a girl among them, but it is not Enya. Leather enters a secret room. Catchum attacks Rain from behind, and Robey attacks Leather. Later, Leather is strapped to a chair. He discovers that Robey tortures kidnap victims on a live stream called The Red Bunker for his followers.
Welcome to the Red Bunker.
Robey tells his viewers that he has a surprise opening act for them as the night's special guest, introducing John Leather. Those who are watching it live put money on Leather's death. This is how Robey makes money. Rain is also brought in, and she finds Enya alive. Robey then forces her to stab Leather. Rain didn't want to stab him, but later she stabs him to save her daughter. After that, Robey tells Leather to break Rain's knee, but he couldn't do it. Instead, Leather tries to convince the people watching them. He reveals that Georgette has told the police the location, and they are on their way. He tells them that watching people being tortured is a crime, and that the police will track them down through their IP addresses.
Now your IP addresses are being traced.
People who are watching this video get terrified and go offline. Leather then attacks and kills Robey's men. Robey runs away and locks the door. Leather sets Rain free and walks out. The sprinklers in the building begin to sprinkle fuel. After a while, a fire starts in the room. Rain fights Catchum brutally. Robey tries to escape with his truck, but Leather grabs the truck's door and struggles to reach Robey. The two men fight fiercely, and the truck crashes into a frozen lake. Robey tries to get out but gets trapped inside and dies. Leather unlocks the door of the house using Robey's phone, so Rain and Enya can escape. Soon, Leather faints and begins to drown, but divers appear just in time. Martin brought them there. Leather has killed a psychopath who was unnecessarily killing people. However, Leather is also arrested as he is still an absconding prisoner. The news of Callum's murderer's death is on the news, which makes Corin happy. She is glad that Leather kept his promise. While recovering from his injuries back in London, he is approached by Cranfield, a senior official with MI5. The official offers him a job instead of going back to prison.
You did a commendable job.
Leather's journey to uphold justice and fight corruption is a relentless one. Through his unorthodox methods and unwavering determination, he allies like-minded individuals and uncovers a web of interconnected criminal networks that span countries and reach the highest levels of society. His legacy becomes one of hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice can prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And that's the end of this recap. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more. Thanks for watching, and see you at the next one.